Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for making time to come to our final community webinar of the academic term. If we haven't met before, my name is Matt East. I'm Learning Technologies Lead at Talis, and delighted to welcome you all here today. So, as you have seen from the communication we sent out about this, today is really around stories from the community, and what I wanted to use this time to kind of really celebrate the success of a number of you using Elevate and just talk about this, the growth that we've seen over this term. Before I start, can I just double check that you can see and hear me? Seeing me is less important, but as long as you can hear me and see my slides, if you could just add into the chat. Thank you very much, Helen, and good to see you here. Cool. So just to recap on what we've kind of covered this term, and as you can see on the left, I have included a QR code to this. We launched a new set of webinars this term, really aiming to help share experiences and share practice around different elements of using Talis Elevate alongside other technologies that you'll be using in teaching right now. And all of that content is still available, and you can access via the QR code, and we'll share the link later on. And I'm sure that will be really useful for you when recapping on your use for semester 2, hopefully if you continue to be using Elevate. So today I want to give an overview. I want to really cover some of the points around the growth of the community and just celebrating how many of you are now using this and how you're using it in practice. I'm very grateful to welcome 3 colleagues from the community to talk about their varied experiences of using Elevate, and the 3 speakers today are all brand new users of Elevate this term as well. And then I'm going to finally launch our new Talis Elevate Community Space, which I'll touch on right at the very end. So, as ever, I'm going to try and keep this to about 40 minutes. If you do have questions, please do post them in the chat as we're going. And one of our speakers, Fran Garrad-Cole from Bangor, can't actually be here today. So in the spirit of everything that you guys are doing all the time at the moment, she has pre-recorded her session. If you do have any questions for Fran specifically, please do add those into the chat, and I will ensure that Fran is able to respond directly to you after the fact. So, many of you will be aware that Talis Elevate has been a product available in the UK for about 2 years now, really. And with any new system, the growth of the early users is really, really important. And I'm delighted to say that this year we've seen some real substantial increase in usage, both because of some of the great examples of impact that Talis Elevate has had. And I'm sure also the value that a system like this can offer with the environment that we're currently teaching in. So as of the end of November, we had over 20,000 students that were using Talis Elevate live this semester only, which for me is just absolutely remarkable from where we were 2 years ago. And I think most importantly, what's been really exciting for me is observing the level of contribution that students are making. And the level of conversation that we're observing occurring. Now, obviously, these are just very large numbers, but actually, when we look at some of the modules that are using Talis Elevate, the contribution that students are making and how that contribution is being used to inform practice and adjust teaching is just, from my perspective, is absolutely astronomical. We have one module at the University of Lincoln this year that's had over 4,000 contributions that have been made by students in a first-year module, ungraded, unassessed, and that is in a module where the use of Elevate has been badged as creating a bibliography together. That blows my mind every time. And actually, as of about last week, we've now passed 100,000 annotations that have been made by users this term. That includes personal notes as well. And that for me is just absolutely phenomenal. We've now seen the growth of the academic community, and as you can see, we've had over 450 academics from 21 institutions using Elevate this academic term. And I think most importantly, what we're seeing now is that this is expanding across a number of different disciplines. We really found that starting off, this was a tool that was particularly valuable for social sciences, but we're now seeing this being used in a wider array of STEM subjects, in courses from fine art to drama, and and you know, more diverse courses, including things like specialist hair and makeup from UCB, and I'm delighted to see a couple of you in the room today joining us as well. But what really excites me here is the array of use cases and points of value that are being taken from Talis Elevate. And again, the reason for launching this community today is so that you can share your experiences and best practice, and you know, what's worked and what hasn't worked with peers from across different disciplines, and we will come to that later on. So I want to move on to, and I'm sure you do, hearing from others who are using this. So I'm delighted to welcome 3 colleagues from the sector today. So Nina Walker from University of Hertfordshire, Fran Garrad-Cole from Bangor University, who is joining us via, well, who's pre-recorded a session for us, and Jon Chandler from UCL. So for all of you, thank you very much for coming along. As I mentioned, these 3 are all brand new users of Elevate, and are coming from very different disciplines, which they will introduce themselves about as we move through. So Nina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello. I'm going to be your glamorous assistant, or attempt to be. So please tell me when to move on, however you would like, really.
Okay, lovely. If we just start, that'd be great. So I'm, as Matt's already said, reasonably new to using Talis within a programme. So I just wanted to run through a couple of examples of how I've used it this semester. So I am a pharmacist by background, but I'm also a student experience lead, and I lead a module in the first year, which is called Transition to Higher Education, helping to support and scaffold students in that really early period. And we have just under 130 students within the programme, which is primarily where I've used this so far. So if we can move on, that would be lovely, thank you. Just to give you a little bit of background around my student cohort. So typically sort of 20 to 40% of our students are first in the family to attend university, and quite a proportion of them don't speak English as a first language. And I've looked into various factors. So my research focuses around looking at students' academic confidence and how we can then work to build that, to scaffold structure, things around that to help them succeed to the best of our abilities. So one of the areas that we've found particularly troublesome for students is this area around verbalizing or communicating what they want to say, perhaps in front of a lecture theatre or responding to questions. And for me, Talis has really given me an opportunity to be able to look at alternative ways to try and encourage and then build the confidence around these sorts of communication and verbalizing skills. We obviously have COVID complicating everything, and our first years are new to us. So it was really important for me to try and find a way that they can work collaboratively together. Thank you. And so I've written my aim out here, and it's just a very, I suppose, fancy way of saying I wanted them to work together. So they're within a pharmacy programme. As I said, they're very new. We want them to be able to develop those bonds between each other, but also my aim with this was to be able to get them to build their confidence in verbalising, communicating ideas by getting reinforcement from others and being able to develop those sorts of skills. So if we move on to the first of the projects, I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects here, and I've just got 10 minutes, so if anyone wants to catch up later, that's fine. I can go into a bit more detail. But they run across various different arenas. So we've used some in an asynchronous manner, some in synchronous. But because this sort of tool was new to the students and also fairly new to me, I wanted to work to co-construct something that didn't require perhaps an awful lot of time for them to think about, something that they could get involved with directly just to get used to how they would use this particular tool. So working in pharmacy, a knowledge of medical terminology is really important, and it can also cause quite a lot of obstacles if students aren't familiar with some of the terminology that we will use. The programme moves at quite a pace, so they do need to be familiar with the things that we're going to use in their terminology. So I thought this was an ideal opportunity for us to be able to co-construct something for the students to look at creating a glossary of terms. So I created a number of these different resources and used it, as I said, in an asynchronous manner for the students to be able to go off, look things up. It really helped to develop some of their active learning, going off and finding out about these different terms. And we had a great response with it. And I created a number of different ones so that we could make sure that everyone got a chance to have a go at some of the different terminologies. The quotes that I've put in here is just some of the things that I've had from the research around perhaps areas that students were nervous about. So one of the students in particular, before we'd done any of this, was nervous around the language and the terminology. And I did have feedback from students that this was a great way for them to be able to link in with the medical jargon, and it allowed us to co-construct a complete glossary to use going forwards. So that was in an asynchronous manner. The next project that I want to just very briefly touch on is perhaps more traditional in how you would perhaps think of using Talis Elevate, but it's looking at some of the academic writing and those sorts of skills. So we've spent quite a lot of time with the students developing academic writing, what sorts of things we would put into this. And I used this within a synchronous environment, so in a workshop setting. And I created in advance an example essay that was littered with different academic writing, sort of faux pas, I suppose. Broke the students up into various different breakout rooms, created links for them, and then they could work within their small groups. So again, this co-construction and the collaborative annotation, working through the essay. And the benefit here for me is that they don't just get to see their own way of working with the essays. They immediately can see how other people have interpreted perhaps what we're writing, what they would think of. And it really, really helps to consolidate the information that we've gone over within lectures, to be able to bring those sorts of things together within this example essay. They also had a mark scheme associated with that. So they were asked to mark the essay, and that gave us a great opportunity for the students again to chat together, to input their own thoughts around the mark scheme and how they would actually interpret that. And for me, that's really important to get an insight into how they are judging perhaps their own performance, and how we need to look at expectations around this sort of academic writing, and also their approach to assessment skills. So the last one that I want to talk about for me is perhaps the most interesting, and it's, as a pharmacist, I'm bound by a set of standards for pharmacy professionals, and they're incredibly important, but they're not the most exciting document to read. So I had, I think, also a chat with Matt about how we could use Talis Elevate going forward. And what I decided to do is I pulled up a case from a pharmacist who had been forwarded for a deliberation around a fitness to practice case, and I structured various different questions into the resource already, and we use this within a synchronous environment within a workshop setting for the students to read through this case, and then according to my prompts add their different thoughts around it. And for me, it's really important for them to be able to see how these standards affect pharmacy professionals, but also how they can start thinking about developing their ethical framework. And it's a lot of things that we do within healthcare. There is an assessment around peer view of behaviours. So this ability to then see other people's perceptions on how this registrant had behaved was really important to start developing at an early stage that ethical framework for them. It helps to develop it, it helps to expand it further, and they get to see how other people take perhaps behaviours and how they would react to different things. Equally, for me, it was really interesting to be able to see how they perceived different behaviours. And as I said, it's not the most exciting of documents, so it's just shown on the next page. Thank you. Which allowed me to get them to interact very well with this document that perhaps in the past they may have just read because they had to, whereas we've now got this very active collaborative engagement with this set of standards. The most interesting bit for me was at the end of the case. So once they'd read what had happened, this was a case that circled around fraud, for them to be able to identify which of the standards had actually been breached. So which did they consider as a future pharmacy professional had been breached by this particular registrant. So it's really interesting to see what sort of things they come up with, and ultimately deciding on a sanction for this particular person, as from their peer perspective, what would they expect would happen in this situation. So it was an absolute cracking way of us being able to get them actively involved in something that perhaps in the past hasn't been terribly exciting for them. So if we can just move on to the next one, thank you. Overall, the analytics give me a great insight into who is participating, who's not, and I use that in collaboration with various other data analytics that we have in terms of identifying students perhaps who are engaging very well, but also starting to identify students that maybe aren't engaging quite so well. For the essay option, it's not quite 4,000, but we did get over 700 comments, which hopefully starts to show you some of the interaction that we're getting within those different situations, and obviously the collaborative learning that all the students are getting. So I'm aware I'm coming up to time, so hopefully just the last slide. So I have really enjoyed using Elevate. It has been great for me to be able to use to involve students, particularly in the current situation. The benefits for me have been around the ability for students to comment in an anonymous manner, which helps us build up their academic confidence, which, as I said, was one of my real drivers for using this aspect. It helps scaffold them, and it ultimately helps us to be able to make sure that they are supported within the programme and aspire to where they want to be. It allows those silent students using the anonymity to be able to interact as well, but also learn from each other. And it's really given me an opportunity to use it in various different ways. So as I said, I've used some perhaps in more traditional with the essay writing, but also using it within the ethical framework for me was really interesting. But I think perhaps going forwards, I'll be looking at using more clinical areas with this. So for example, with our students that are about to go out into pre-reg, we would run, so I ran various outduction activities, increasing their awareness of things like prioritisation skills for patients. So if they're going to see patients on a ward, who would they go and see first? Who would they move, lower down the prioritisation list? And Elevate gives me an opportunity to create things like a bed list and then have a discussion, this sort of collaborative discussion around why they would prioritise different patients in different ways and how they would tackle that from a clinical perspective, which for me is invaluable because it sends them out as very competent and able students. So I think overall that covers most of it. We'd also use it perhaps for things like OSCEs, using videos for students to be able to look at different ways of picking up around communication and all those aspects which at the moment are perhaps a little bit more difficult in the middle of the pandemic. So thank you very much.
Nina, thank you. What I love about your use of Elevate here is that it's so you're picking up on so many key points that are really challenging in your current teaching practice at the moment. And there were a couple of things actually I wanted to pick up, but anyone else who's got some questions, please do fire them into the question box. Firstly, a comment on the use of the fitness practice case. One of our colleagues from the University of Lincoln has used an approach called diagnostic assessment. So he has used a case study at different points in the term to kind of gauge students, in your case, ethical positioning or standards. I think that could be really interesting if you do this kind of thing again, doing that type of activity in week 2, in week 6, in week 10, and feeding back to students on what you've observed has changed in their positioning, if that makes sense. I think that could be really interesting.
It is really interesting seeing their perhaps different views on things, and then them rationalising why they're coming from that particular perspective, we've looked at a couple of cases. One, someone got suspended for 2 months, and some of them were outraged that it was only 2 months and things like this. So it is really, really interesting to see how they develop.
So I have a question around some of your use, and you mentioned there was one of the first slides where I saw that you'd added loads of thumbs ups to student contributions, and I've got a real interest at the moment in affirmation and positive affirmation from academics. Can you just talk a bit about kind of the how and the why you approached that, and what impact you think that had?
Yeah, so I think with that, there is definitely a need for reassurance. There's a lot of aspects around perhaps students feeling that they are imposters, so the sort of imposter syndrome around being at university. Am I meant to be here? Have I got the right level? So just by giving that reassurance within that setting helps to then encourage them, and again the confidence of being able to think, okay, then I'll go further and I'll look into these different aspects. Certainly running through things like the essay writing, it's incredibly easy to have various different tabs open. You can dip into things as and when you want, and again just drop those things in to just encourage students to move further, or perhaps give a little bit of direction if they are wandering off onto something that's perhaps not quite so relevant, to bring them back in at a very active point, rather than perhaps after however many weeks of written feedback on something else. This gives me an immediate response for students to be able to redirect.
So you used it mainly synchronously?
So we've used it in both. So some when they just went back on, but particularly within the essay writing, it allowed me to encourage as they were working in their groups, and to make sure that it was, yeah. Okay,
cool, thank you. Nina, thank you very much. I think it's an awesome example, and I very much look forward to seeing what you do next term.
Good.
Nice one. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Dr. Fran Garrad-Cole, Deputy Head of School and National Teaching Fellow from Bangor University. Fran can't be with us today. She has made a video, as I've mentioned already. The frame rate on this may not be great for you guys. I'm going to turn my camera off and mute. The key thing is obviously in what she's saying, but if you do have any questions, again, please add them to the chat or to the questions tab.
Hi, I'm Dr. Fran Garrad-Cole, and I'm sorry I can't present live to you today, but I'm in the middle of a seminar. I wanted to share with you some of the ways in which I've used Talis Elevate for the first time in my module this year. So I teach on a compulsory Year 2 psychology module at Bangor University, and the module is called Personality, Intelligence and Individual Differences. One of the things about this module that can make it quite hard to engage students' interest is that it covers very historic theories of personality and intelligence. So I cover topics such as Freud, Maslow, Spearman's G, things that psychology students have to cover. And I really want them to recognise the value of those theories in modern day research and in contemporary psychology. That can be quite difficult in a 2-hour face-to-face lecture environment that we've delivered in the past, but this year we've gone fully online, and that's enabled me to use Talis actually in the online seminars to interact with the students a little bit more. So I've used Talis Elevate in a couple of different ways, either before the seminar to gauge the students' interest in a topic and to see the sorts of conversations they're having around the topic, and that then feeds into the seminar discussions, or during the seminars as part of the Blackboard Collaborate breakout rooms in order to do peer-led synchronous learning. So one of the first things I did was to present the students with a short YouTube video just asking the question, why do we still teach Freud? And a lot of people, have many criticisms of Freud, but there is some value in studying those theories. So I asked them to watch this video and then place comments within the video at points they thought were interesting or points at which they had something to say. And you can see towards the end here, there was a few more comments there. And the comments from the students pop up along the right-hand side. And I was able to view those comments before I met the students, so I could kind of meet them where they were in their thinking about the theory. The next seminar, I presented this case study to the students that I extracted from this particular book. And the case study presents the story of this guy called Hank and some of his characteristic behaviour. And I asked the students to annotate this case study whilst thinking about Freud's theory of psychosexual development. So all of these coloured lines here are where the students have picked up behaviours that they think are represented by Freud's theory. So quite rightly, they've picked up things like his sarcasm and his nail biting and alluded to the fact that that might represent oral fixations in Hank's behaviour. So they then placed again their comments down the side, and I was able to interact with those comments during the seminar to think about what they'd understood about the theory and where perhaps their gaps were. What I also did was present 4 different questions about Hank, the guy in this case study. And during the seminar, I broke the students off into 4 different groups, had them read through these case studies alongside the students' comments, and put together an answer as a group for each of these 4 questions, which they then presented back to us. As part of the module, I'm asking my students to write a critical evaluation essay of one of these key theories, and they've got the whole semester to write the essay, but I really wanted them to engage in some peer-led formative assessment for that essay in order to achieve the best marks they can when the essay is submitted for summative assessment in January. So the first thing I did is I wanted them to present the theory really succinctly, just 1 paragraph, tell me about the theory before going on to critique it. So I asked them to each submit that first paragraph to Blackboard. I then anonymised those paragraphs and selected 2 or 3, uploaded them to different Talis links, and then I was able to split the group into 6 or 7 breakout groups within Blackboard Ultra and have them read these paragraphs and place their own comments on what they think the students did well and where they thought there was room for improvement. The groups then presented these paragraphs back to the whole seminar and pointed out where they thought these paragraphs were well written and where they could do better. And I would then feed back on that peer-led commentary. What I really wanted them to be able to do in the scope of the module was to be able to have feedback on a full draft of an essay in line with the full grading rubric, so they could see how I grade and what I'm looking for in an essay. However, I often find that there isn't really enough time with their other work for them to write a full, decent draft of the essay, have peer-led feedback, and then be able to submit a revised version. So instead what I did is I went through the previous year's students and I pulled up 2 or 3 essays from those years on different topics, but graded to the same grading rubric. And I anonymised those and uploaded those. And then I asked the students to break out into these, I think it was 5 or 6 different groups, take 1 essay each, and then grade it themselves in line with the rubric that I was offering up. They then came back and presented the grade they thought this work would receive and why. And then I live graded the essay and told them what grade I would give the essay and tried to explain any differences there might have been between their grades and mine. And actually, typically, they were far harsher than I was. They gave much lower grades and they were much more picky about some of the writing and some of the presentation than I would have been. The final activity I did in Talis was just last week, and I think this is the one that worked the best for me. So we've been talking about intelligence and theories of human intelligence. And so I found 2 YouTube videos about artificial intelligence, which I presented to the group. So I had 2 videos. One, they were sort of slightly opposing views. One was slightly more positive towards artificial intelligence than the other one. And I then split the Blackboard Collaborate seminar into 8 groups. So 4 saw each of the 2 videos, and I presented 4 different questions to each of the 2 video groups. So there were 4 questions and 2 groups each for each video. So there were 8 groups altogether. And I presented questions like this one. Does artificial intelligence use crystallized or fluid intelligence? So drawing on the theories they've been learning about. I also proposed questions like, what are the moral implications of using AI? Explain AI in terms of intelligence theories, and can AI ever replace humans? So those 4 questions were posed to 8 different groups who looked at 2 different videos. And then I brought them together to sort of debate and discuss those questions. And this was really interesting because they were the most vocal and most active I've ever seen them. Not so much in the video and in the chat, sort of speaking out loud, but in the chat function. They were really engaged and really active in this discussion. So it's a really nice way to sort of use those old theories, apply it to something more modern, and get them to engage and interact. And I'm absolutely certain I wouldn't have had that many comments in that chat or in any of these interactive activities that we've had here had I been doing it in a one-to-one lecture environment. So Talis Elevate has really helped me with my online delivery this year.
Cool. I hope you could all hear and see that okay. Fran and I have now been having a chat about kind of expanding that video-based content a bit further and actually giving students choices around the content that they want to discuss that week. So, for example, giving students three videos on the same subject matter, but coming from different perspectives and viewpoints, and actually asking the students to focus on the one that they either disagree with or they fundamentally believe in, for example. And that has value both from an analytical perspective in getting a better gauge of students' kind of preference or positioning, I guess you could say, around the subject matter, but also sparking some conversation based on alignment or misalignment. Really could also be very, very valuable. Massive thanks to Fran, and she is accessible on Twitter, etc. as well, if you have other questions you want to ask.
Hi, I'm Dr.
Right, sorry about that. I'm going to hand over to our final presenter today. So Dr. Jon Chandler, Senior Teaching Fellow from UCL. Jon, are you there?
Yes, here I am.
Hello. We can see and hear you.
Fantastic. There we go. Thank you for sort of putting this together, Matt, and thank you, Fran and Nina, for your contributions, because it's actually really interesting hearing what other people are doing. I know this is the point of this webinar, and it's interesting hearing it because we're sort of doing very different things. So I think what I've picked up Talis Elevate sort of quite late, actually. I think in sort of September we got it rolled out. And how I'm using it in my teaching specifically is more towards sort of the advanced seminars we do with our third years and sometimes with our second years. So it's we do these advanced seminars with in small groups of sort of 10 to 15 students, where normally they're sort of working closely with primary sources, historical sources, to conduct sort of research questions. And I'm using Talis Elevate as a way of linking that sort of the asynchronous activity, the reading they're doing of these sources, with then our sort of seminar discussion, and then onwards into their coursework. And I'm teaching 2 of these advanced seminars, and so I thought, as I'm teaching 2 different seminars, I'd try using Talis in 2 different ways. And in one of the seminars, I'm asking students to focus in on some of these particular primary sources, and this is a course on 18th century Ireland, so they're having to deal with some 18th century English and Gaelic texts sometimes, which can be quite difficult to read. So I was impressed that Talis Elevate was able to sort of cope with the text. So in that course, I'm asking them to read these primary sources very closely. And in the other course, I decided to focus more on the secondary literature. And so in that course, I'm asking students to, each week I've put their reading on Talis Elevate, and I've asked them to sort of highlight any areas they want to sort of question in that source, and that we will sort of discuss in the seminar. So that one sort of I use it as a way of shaping the seminar. And so if you can move to the next slide seamlessly, Matt. What I thought I'd talk about very briefly today is how I use Elevate in these sort of 2 classes, how my students use Elevate, which is not entirely the same, and then what we've learned and what we think of it, having sort of only been using it for this semester. So if we can move onwards. So really, my priority, as I sort of said, is to focus students on specific historical questions. So I usually give them quite a specific task. So here's an example from my 18th century Ireland course, where I've asked them to focus in on, here's a couple of primary sources. And the idea is that students will read through these, like the resolutions. The first one is only 2 or 3 pages long, and it's sort of a list of resolutions. And I asked them to choose one and explain it. And normally when all 15 students do so, that gives us quite a lot of sort of different passages that they've highlighted the importance of. And then that takes us into the seminar where we can discuss that further. And then the idea is that will then lead into their essay on this topic, if they choose to write an essay on this topic, where they will sort of they will be analysing this this source within that essay, so it feeds forward that way. So it's a way of giving them sort of continual feedback. So I give them feedback in the initial asynchronous stage, then we just elaborate more in the seminar class, and then write about it in their essay, and so we'll receive feedback at the final stage then. So hopefully the idea is it allows them to build on this this analysis. And so if I move on to the next question, next slide. And this is sort of an example from this source. It's also a way for me to try and engage with the students asynchronously. So for example, here's in this source, no one picked up, no one highlighted clause 18 here, which is actually the most important clause actually in the whole text, but it's towards the end of the text, so not many of the students got that far. So this was an opportunity for me to jump in and try and point out that clause 18 is actually the most important one and ask them why. And we start up an asynchronous conversation, which we then can sort of continue in this seminar class. So it's a good way of me sort of making sure that they're reading the whole source and that they're picking out the important things from the source before we actually get to the seminar class. You know, previously I wouldn't have figured that out until we got to the seminar class, but I know going in that they haven't, in this case, got as far as clause 18. And then if I can go to the next slide. The third way is obviously to empower students to shape the discussion. So in my other class, so whereas in my 18th century Ireland course, I'm more focusing on asking them to analyze primary sources. In my other course, which is on native North America, I've used it to ask the students to ask questions. So each week I ask students to pose at least one question on one of the secondary source readings. I normally have 2 or 3. And I ask them to sort of pose these questions for us to discuss in this seminar class. And so here's just a couple of examples of students posing these questions. And this is quite a good way of, I think, getting a bit of student involvement actually, and allowing the students to structure the course, structure the discussion. And again, it also helps me to realize which bits of the sources that they don't understand, as sort of the one on the left indicates. A good example for me to sort of, you know, okay, I need to spend an extra 5-10 minutes on this. So that kind of works quite well as well. And then if we move on to the next slide. My students, I think, really like this point of asking questions. They use it quite a lot, and they use it in both of the courses actually. So in the one where I specifically asked them to ask questions, they do so. But in my other class where I haven't asked them to do so, they still continue. They still do that. They do make use of the thumbs up button to sort of agree with each other's posts. I find they tend not to reply to each other. This is the thing I found with sort of my Talis Elevate so far, is that they tend to wait for me to jump in. So for example, the one on the right, someone asked for clarification, and I left it a few days to see if anyone would answer the question, and no one did. So I had to jump in and explain. But I think it's really good that they're using this as a way of answering questions, asking questions, even if it is just a list of sort of 20 questions asked by students which they don't engage with. Yeah, and then the next slide. But they do sort of use it, especially in my sort of 18th century Ireland course, where we're thinking about sort of how we use these primary sources to answer historical questions. I did find that they do sort of comment on each other sometimes, and they do start sort of engaging with each other asynchronously, which is was the intention behind sort of our use of the software. And again, it allows us to sort of shape the classroom discussion. So although I don't always comment on the discussion, in the first couple of weeks of the class, I tried to sort of comment and reply to every single person's post. I don't do that anymore. I don't have the time. I've weaned myself away from it, but I do try and sort of within the class, so the seminar discussion, sort of point out, okay, you know, Isabel, you made a really good point here. Can you elaborate on that? Let's talk about that a little bit further. So it's a good way for, I think, the students to collaborate and me to build that up. And then I think the final way my students use Elevate is, I need to click a few more times, there we go, is to make private notes. So if you just click down, I find, so these are sort of some of the secondary sources I've used in my native North America class, where I've asked them to sort of ask questions. So you can see you've had 2 students ask questions on the top source, and 2 are sort of class questions on the second one, but an awful lot more of them have been writing private notes. And I think that ability to kind of make notes on the text, they've found really useful. And actually, I think from the student feedback, that's actually the thing they found the most useful about this software, as much as sort of the ability to ask public questions, but the ability to sort of use it as a way of structuring their notes and then to help them with the essays. So that's something which I suppose I didn't expect when I was going into it, that they would use that as much as they have done. And then I think finally, if we move onwards, So what I've learned is that I'm using it mostly for asynchronous, as an asynchronous activity, but it is useful as a way for structuring my synchronous teaching. And it's interesting hearing Fran and Nina talking about how they're using it synchronously, and I've got colleagues at UCL who are using it more as a synchronous tool for discussing a sort of a text or an image in the class. So I'm probably going to think about how I can perhaps use it more as a synchronous activity as well next semester. I think it works particularly well when it's like with anything in teaching, it works especially well when it is structured, when it's a very specific task and they will be getting a sort of specific feedback on that. And I found it works very well with a wide variety of document types, because I'm using, although mostly text, they are sort of various, as you probably saw in the previous slides, various forms of 18th century and 17th century print and handwriting and images, which aren't always the easiest things for document viewers to handle, and it has worked them very well. I haven't tried using it with a video yet, so it's good to see that it works well with a video as well, Fran's video. And then finally, they seem to really like the software and they do use it. My challenge so far, which again I think is probably shared by a lot of people, is getting them to engage directly with each other and not just talk past each other. But I found that with whether it's using Talis or whether it's using a sort of a bog standard forum, is that they tend to talk past each other and rely on the lecturer to sort of to try and pull them together rather than engaging with each other. But I think that's a sort of a challenge, an exciting challenge to look forward to. And then in our final slide, I put together a little bit of the student feedback we've got so far based on Talis, and it's all been positive actually. They really like the ability to comment on a weekly reading and annotate, and I think this sort of the ability to ask questions but also make private notes they particularly enjoy. Cool. I think that's everything from me.
John, thank you again, and I think you've touched on again a number of different experiences using this. So thank you for that, and I'm really glad to see you pointing out about the students getting value from the private note taking as well. And one of the things I often say with Elevate is don't elevate everything, don't try and turn everything into a collaborative activity. But there's no problem with putting everything into Elevate, particularly as you can see that students are, as you say, engaging with those resources for independent study. And again, that is a hugely valuable source of insight into which resources are helpful, which students are actively engaged in independent study or not, in different ways within the product as well. So, really good you drew on that. I feel like this is a conversation that needs its own webinar, but I'm going to ask you a question anyway. You talked about, I guess, trying to, the challenge around deepening the discourse between students, and you've seen examples of where that worked quite well, but it was a challenge overall. Do you have any thoughts on any tactics that you're going to adopt, or any design approaches or principles that you're going to bring in next term to try and encourage that that conversation to occur between students?
One thing which I've talked about with colleagues is being a bit more specific with who's supposed to be doing what. So I've just usually said please put one comment into the text analyzing a resolution, and lo, all the students put in one comment. And because I haven't specifically said I want you to reply to one comment, they haven't replied to one comment. So setting that as a specific task to do, or even sort of dividing the students. So I say half of you, I want you to comment, and the other half, I want you to sort of reply with an analysis of this, with a feedback on this comment. I think could be one way. I think I've heard colleagues try that method, which can work well as well. So I think it's, to some extent, it's how we structure the course, or how we structure the activity. I suppose I'm mindful of student workload, so I wouldn't want to say everyone has to write a comment, an extensive comment, and reply to 3/4 of the things which they might start kind of resenting it for. To some extent, I quite like leaving the freedom to them to just decide how much they want to engage with it, particularly considering we don't grade it in any way. So yeah, this is not kind of a graded activity. So I think if I sort of start pushing for the amount that I want, if I say they need to be doing 4 or 5 different comments, it will start I'll start getting resistance there if it's not being graded. But I do think perhaps how I structure that is a way of thinking about it. And again, I really liked what Fran was doing, is sort of doing it as a live synchronous activity. So maybe sort of taking that, okay, we've got these, if I took one of these documents which, you know, has 15 comments on it and doing as a live activity, okay, let's go through and, you know, engage with this and discuss this sort of in a breakout group and work through these comments, and then come to feedback might be another way of doing it. But you're right, I think there's a whole other webinar to think about sort of how we encourage sort of student engagement with it.
And I think, yeah, I think it definitely needs wider conversation, and I'm definitely one for not encouraging the kind of grading, I guess. Really, I think you've hit the nail on the head really there, that, you know, that kind of mandate takes away from the value of social learning really in many ways. I think one of the things I'm reflecting on now is with a user from the States, a guy called Jesse Stonnell. He used Elevate very much as a mechanism for collaborating and communicating on video. But he starts off his course, you know, literally the first week, he's like, this is your space, this is your community, you know, the value, your contributions are as valuable as the content I'm presenting you with. You know, let discussions flourish, challenge each other, share opinions, you know, everyone's voice is essential and integral in all of this. And I think that's a really good way of kind of introducing your pedagogy really into your discipline or into your new module. That, I think, for me personally, feels, you know, like the right kind of approach to take as a kind of onboarding or an introduction to the module. So we've got a question that's come in from Ali, and I guess this is actually going to be open to Nina and to John. So we've seen some good examples of annotated text and engaging in dialogue with peers and tutors on or around such annotations. What is the next level of learner engagement for knowledge construction?
I'm happy for you to take this, Nina.
So I think at the moment, so as you said, we're fairly new with using this, particularly with my first years. It's been about getting them engaged in just commenting on each other, developing various different aspects. But I think as we use it, as we go through the programme, it does allow us to start thinking about those higher levels of thinking more around the criticality. So some of the aspects that perhaps John and Fran have done already with higher up the programmes, I'm introducing them to it at the moment, but we can then start to develop that higher level of thinking, that process, particularly maybe things like the prioritisation. They're going to have to be showing the processes that they're going through. What are they considering? Why would they rate this patient as a higher priority than the other? So it's allowing us to then differentiate between their skills, I suppose, of bringing together a lot of the holistic aspects that they've been developing through the programs. We can start to see how they're integrating different aspects together to develop that whole sort of practitioner. I suppose that's where mine will go.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, so with these sort of like activities that I was showing you, where I'm asking them to go through and sort of, you know, highlight a clause, they're pretty good at sort of, you know, here's the clause, here's what it says, and it's then the evaluation of what is the sort of the significance of that they struggle with. And I think sort of, you know, perhaps like I was talking about with Matt earlier, sort of like going through the first time and say, you know, as an asynchronous activity, everyone comments on sort of what these clauses mean, and then as a synchronous activity, okay, let's go and in a breakout group talk about evaluate which is the most significant, what is the sort of the clause we need to spend the most time discussing, and sort of spend some time in the live seminar perhaps sort of commenting on that. But I do think that sort of higher level learning is perhaps difficult for even the sort of the second and third years that I'm working with sort of to do kind of asynchronously. I do think they need sort of a bit more sort of teacher sort of guidance there. So I think and I find that difficult sometimes to do within Talis itself, because, you know, you saw an example where I asked sort of, you know, why have we, what's this meaning of this clause? No one's pointed out. I think if I asked a question of like, you know, why is this clause particularly significant, or why is this one more important than the others, I might struggle to get sort of responses at that stage. I'm not sure.
I think it's quite useful though to be able to set some of the prompts and the questions in advance. So particularly where I've used it within synchronous environments, so things like the fitness to practice, you know, having this level of discussion around their perceptions of things. If I've got questions in there, we can work in a synchronous session I can send them off for a couple of minutes to read a particular aspect, put some comments on, and then we can talk directly around it, and that helps me, I suppose, react quite proactively to how they're feeling. Like you were saying, John, within your talk around, you know, it starts to identify some of these areas perhaps that they're missing, and that allows us to have that discussion immediately, and hopefully round their learning around it perhaps a little better.
And hopefully helps them prepare for the seminar, because they know these are the sort of these are the points we're going to be covering.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just building on what you have both said, and you know, coming back to Ali's question, really, I think what's been really interesting for me to observe is the different ways that academics are trying to get students to demonstrate a level of higher order thinking. And I often refer back to Wendy Garnham from the University of Sussex, who teaches a foundation course around social psychology. And she takes a very Socratic approach in the first weeks to, you know, to kind of just get students using the tool, speaking with each other, and then you know, actually thinking at a level of depth about the content. And if you observing the way that she actually asks questions over the period of the term, you can see that she's trying to adjust from surface level thinking to, you know, really higher order level thinking, you know, trying to get students to demonstrate, you know, a level of synthesis, etc. And it's really interesting just observing how that can be, how impactful that can be. But then once you set the students kind of going in that regard, and they seeing them almost just take ownership really entirely, I think it's really, you know, very, very, very interesting. And in fact, I do have a previous webinar where we talk about deepening student engagement, and I utilise, I talk around Ginny Salmon's 5-stage model and give examples of the different tactics and techniques that people have used at different stages there, really. You know, very much building on what you have both talked about so far today, I think, really, and what other colleagues using Elevate have demonstrated as well. So thank you both for answering that as well. So I am going to now move on and kind of round this off, really. So I mentioned that at the start of this webinar that we've seen significant growth in Talis Elevate over this academic year. And you've heard some great examples from 3 of our colleagues across the community, but there are hundreds of others that are coming up and that, you know, we want to share. So I'm delighted to announce that we're now going to launch our new space, our new Talis Elevate Community Space. We've designed this based on feedback from the community as well. So, you know, we want to make this a space where you as the academic community have complete ownership of this, really. The goal really is just to enable conversations to flourish across institutions, so we're not just working in our kind of domain or institutional silos, really. The structure at the moment is going to be very very kind of flexible, but we have put in really just some kind of initial focus around things like sharing good practice, introductions, help and advice, and that kind of thing. I think critically for me, I don't want to see this as being a space that is just about Talis Elevate. You know, this is one tool in the toolkit that we teach with. So please don't feel that this is only for Elevate. This is for anything that, you know, you feel is pertinent in your teaching or in your discipline. And finally, we will be seeking to construct discipline network groups as larger kind of groups of academics within specific disciplines emerge. Dr. Jamie Wood from the University of Lincoln has kindly offered up his kind of leadership on the History and Heritage Network Group, which we have now set up, but I will be seeking contributions and input from colleagues across the sector if you would like to set something up for, you know, anything else, any other areas. So if you'd like to join this, it is a Teams channel. We will be running community-based webinars from that moving forward, really for the kind of things that we're talking about today, but very specific topics. So, you know, please do keep an eye out for that. You can sign up using the QR code, and we will share the link afterwards as well. So please do get involved and, you know, come and introduce yourself to everyone else in the community. And a final thing from me, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for coming along today, for being involved and giving Talis Elevate a go. It's been an incredibly exciting academic year for me, and I'm constantly amazed with the array of ways that Elevate's being used, and, you know, we've seen a few examples today. This has been a horrific year for many of you, I'm sure, but I am constantly, again, blown away by the passion and determination from you all. You are truly rock stars, so well done on getting through it. We're nearly there, and I am very excited to see what happens next academic year. So thank you very much to everyone. We have gained back 6 minutes, so congratulations. Go and make a cup of tea, and I hope to see you all again in the new year.